My name is Allison Madison, and I'm the program manager at Wisconsin Saltwise. And I know a number of you have been on probably for several days of Zoom, but just in case people haven't, that's who I am. And yeah, I'm going to be talking today all about kind of overviewing this problem a little bit, what's being done, and ways that people can get involved or get more involved in their local communities. So thanks to all of you for tuning in today, for caring about this issue, wanting to learn more. And yeah, I look forward to, I know, continuing to work with many of you and maybe working with some new folks in the future. So I'm going to pull up here. And also I will say right now that if there are any questions, please put those into the chat. You can put them into the chat at any time. And since it's just me, I'll do my best today to kind of keep an eye on the chat. If something makes sense for me to answer right away, otherwise I'll kind of wait till the end with those. If the chat doesn't work for any reason, you can email me at wisaltwise@gmail.com. I also have my work phone here, so I'll try to keep an eye on Gmail and the chat. All right, so I'm going to share my screen. So Wisconsin Saltwise, as I've mentioned, for people who've been on, is really a coalition of organizations across Wisconsin. I have the logos up right now of a number of our partners that have been really involved and fund the Saltwise Coalition, also people that have been involved with the planning of Salt Awareness Week and other ongoing activities. But there are so many municipalities and school districts and private partners across the state that I'm not able to capture on this slide. I would need a much bigger slide, or you'd have tiny little logos to look at. So many of you may be a part of the Saltwise partnership as well. And I thank you for that. And so today I'm going to share some of the stories of the great work that's being done across Wisconsin. And of course, a special shout out to the Fund for Lake Michigan. They are right now the primary funding partner that enables this work to be happening around the state. So thank you to Amber and Casey and Vicki and all of the other folks at the fund. All right, let's see, we're clicking forward. There we go. All right, so why are we talking about salt in our water? Well, we've been putting down a lot of it, right? Mountains of salt. The top left photo is a picture from the Port of Milwaukee. So a lot of salt comes into that port and then is transported out, some obviously used in Milwaukee and other salt transported around southeastern Wisconsin. And historically, it's been really cheap, right? And it's done some good stuff. So the mindset has been, well, if salt is good, it's keeping people safe. Some is good, more is better, let's just put it down. And we see that has led to I would say the overuse, but the abuse of salt. And the picture on the bottom left is one that I took at a sidewalk, unfortunately just a block or so from my house. And the contractors that take care of this area really over apply, and had tried to have conversations. Conversations sometimes are difficult when a store owner is not the property owner. So we have property owners that maybe live in, Florida. No offense, my mom lives in Florida, but and they, work with a property manager, and then the property manager hires a contractor. And so when you go into the store, the people you talk to may be just as frustrated with the amount of salt that's going down as you are. And trying to track down and get conversations with the right people sometimes takes a while. But what we really want people to understand is that too much salt is not keeping us safer. Too much salt can actually be a slip hazard. This is a photo I took after days of rain, still salt left around. And it's very clear that that salt has been doing damage over the years to the concrete. And of course, it degrades our fresh water. So sweeping up extra salt is one great thing that pretty much all of us can do if it's on our own property. Very simple. I personally have also been known to sweep up salt at the sidewalk that I had pictured in the last slide, and sometimes other places. I'm going to leave that up to you where you want to draw that line, but I would really highly encourage you to sweep up if there's any extra salt on your property. Now you do want to wait for that salt to be dry, pavement to be dry, salt to be dry. Otherwise it can clump up and then it's not really useful at all. And then what do you do with it? So if you do sweep up salt, you can use it again. There might be, some dirt in there, but it'll work just as well on your sidewalk as it was going to the first time. Also use that extra salt as a reminder that it was over applied. And so try to use a little less the next time. And yeah, I think those are my comments right now on sweeping up salt. There is right now, I'm going to touch on this a little later, an ordinance right now in the city of Madison that requires people to sweep up extra salt on city sidewalks, on that public property, seeing all the damages that extra salt can do. If you've overapplied, you are supposed to sweep up that extra salt. I'll talk more about potentially seeing more ordinances like that in other communities going forward. But I really feel like we need to acknowledge, like I said, salt was really cheap, right? So the more the better kind of mindset for a long time. And that's changing. And so this is actually, in my mind, personally, as an advocate for our freshwater, a really great trend that we're seeing. The cost of salt is going up, and it's causing big users like our state DOT to rethink practices around salt use and just winter maintenance in general. Working on, better mechanical removal means less salt. We'll talk more about these specific practices, but this line is what is driving some of those really significant changes that we're seeing in the winter maintenance industry. So I had a question come in to clarify a little bit about what we mean when we're talking about salt, sodium, and chloride. So I love this slide because I used to be a chemistry teacher, so I get to nerd out a little bit. So thanks, I think, Margaret, for asking that question. So salt is a compound of sodium and chloride. We often see it written NaCl, meaning for every one sodium ion, there is one chloride ion. Now, I've been called out for using the term ion. It's a chemistry term that just means that it's a little particle that has a charge. So if something has a plus or minus charge, we can get into electron trading, but you can also use the word like particle. So a tiny little particle of sodium, tiny little particle of chloride, and they're paired up kind of on a 1-to-1 ratio in salt, sodium chloride, this particular salt. There are other salts. And when salt and water interact, water molecules, so I'm using the term molecule, again, we could say like a little tiny particle. I think everyone's familiar with H2O, right? So water molecules really love to be by one another. That's why our liquid water is actually more dense than solid water. Ice floats, right? They love to be by one another, but they also really, really, really love salt. And so when the salt and the water interact, those water molecules come and they give these giant bear hugs to sodium and to chloride. And we could get, really, really geeky here with the chemistry, but I think I'm going to leave it at that. This idea that sodium and chloride get giant bear hugs from those water molecules, and the water does not let go. It will not let go. And that's why it is so hard to pull that the sodium and that chloride out of water. And the only way we can do it, reverse osmosis, takes tons of energy, going to cost us lots of money. Energy means greenhouse gases. So it's just so much better to try to keep that salt out in the first place. Also, if we wanted to pull the salt out of water that's in our lakes or our streams, we'd be, like taking everything else, all other life out of that water. So it's not practical to do that in our natural ecosystems, and it's financially really prohibitive to do that even in our wastewater. But we have this idea now, hopefully, that when salt is in water, we have sodium and chloride, and they're separate now. And again, I could also try to tie this to, that's why water molecules, instead of forming those ice crystals, now that they're interacting with the sodium and the chloride, right? So that's part of why water molecules leave one another, and instead of ice, we've got water when we add salt to that ice, at least at certain temperatures. So kind of why, part of the question that I received was, why are we talking about chloride more than sodium yesterday? So in yesterday's talk with Shannon Hayden, she really focused on chloride. And there is a reason for that. And that's the way that salt, the sodium and the chloride, separate ions now interact in our soils. So, and I shared this with people at the end of Sujay's presentation on Monday, so bear with me if you've seen this already. But when we have salt water, so now that separate water molecules holding onto the chloride and the sodium, and it's moving through our soil, clay particles in the soil have negative charges on them. So they're like little magnets for things that have positive charges, those positively charged ions, like our sodium. You can see my clay particles beforehand, they were holding on to other things. So they can hold on to potassium, which is a really important nutrient for plant growth, right? They can hold on to different metals like iron. I have manganese here in this picture because Sujay talked about manganese showing up in the water when salt concentrations were going up. So when water is carrying the sodium and that chloride through the soil profile, the sodium can grab a hold of those clay particles, and the clay particles are releasing then sometimes some of the other positively charged things. So it's kind of like that. I can only hold so much stuff. It's called their cation exchange capacity. And so some things are let go of, and the soil can build up with sodium, which is not good for our plants, right? We're losing some of the nutrients, so some of that soil fertility. Sodium, when that builds up in the soils, also causes soil structure to break apart, which can cause release of more nutrients, increase erosion, also reduce soil's ability to hold water well. But what you'll see next in this little diagram is what's going to happen to the chloride, because chloride is negative, right? Clay particles are negative. Those things are not attracting one another. So the chloride here is going to move through the soil far more readily than the sodium. And that's why, big part of why we've looked at chloride concentrations in our drinking water and groundwater, sometimes even in our surface water, because the thought is that sodium is going to get held, and it's not going to be building up in our water at the same rates. So chloride, again, here being the main indicator, or the species, the piece of salt that we're measuring in our water. So chloride concentrations, since we've been putting salt down, now these are several lakes in the Madison area, we're just seeing those chloride concentrations goes up and up and up and up and up, right? Because we put more and more and more and more salt down. I think I'll leave it at that. If people want to talk about why we see more higher chloride levels in Lake Wingra than the other lakes, people in the Madison area might be kind of clued into that already. Some of you have seen my presentations before, have been asked this already. So I'll let you think about that. And if you want to ask afterwards, we can go there. But I want people to see that this is not just a Madison problem. It's not just a Milwaukee problem. We're seeing chloride, again, now that one component of salt, go up in waters all across the state. So naturally in Wisconsin, we would see chloride concentrations, or expect to see chloride concentrations between 0 and 10, very, very low chloride. And that's not the case anymore. We've gone to the tens, the hundreds in some areas, and even the thousands of milligrams per liter. Now, I want to tell you that this data set was mapped out here by Linnea Rock. She was a graduate student at UW-Madison working with Dr. Hillary Dugan. And Linnea just gathered all of this data that had been, well, maybe I should say the data was gathered and available on the water quality data website. So anybody could actually gather this data. If you've got Linnea's awesome data analysis skills, you could make this map yourself. But these data points have been gathered over a number of years. People are not necessarily going out, or haven't historically gone out and tried to capture chloride when it's spiking up. So I want to acknowledge that this map here is probably not like the worst of what we've seen, but it's giving us a general picture. And again, I'll leave it to folks in the audience, especially if you're watching this with others, maybe talk about why we might see higher chloride concentrations in the Milwaukee area. What do you think would be driving that? Also, some of you have seen this salinity plume coming out of Marshfield. Think about why that might be. What could a driver be there? So I mentioned the idea of not catching spikes. So as salt pollution has become an issue that people are talking about, paying more attention to, there's been a push to do more monitoring and really try to understand what's going on in our waterways in terms of the salt and the salt concentrations. So this is data that was gathered by SewerPAC, Southeastern Wisconsin Regional Planning Commission. So they have not published their final results of a multi-year study, but I was able to get this preliminary data from them. And you'll see here that this these are grab samples. So staff have gone out and they've captured a small sample of water and sent that into the lab for testing. And what they've seen, what you can see clearly, is that we have really big spikes, generally around February, sometimes a little earlier in the year. So this would be when we have put salt down on roads, and then there's a warmer day, some of that snow, salty kind of snow melt is going into our streams and causing these huge loading events, lots of salt in a short period of time into our streams, going up to the thousands of milligrams per liter. Again, we're measuring this in chloride, milligrams of chloride per liter. So there are a couple lines on this graph which signify current Wisconsin limits for chloride. So there are two limits here. The yellowish dashed line is the DNR's chronic toxicity limit. So anything above that we're saying is damaging to organisms over time. Chronic exposure is going to do them harm. There's also this red dashed line, which is an acute limit, saying that if organisms are exposed to water that's that salty, even in a short period of time, it's going to be really harmful. So my colleague Jane Jenks in Waukesha County likes to say it's the kill me fast, kill me slow lines. So I mentioned that we don't necessarily have incredible data and incredible understanding of what's going on in a lot of our water bodies. And so this is another opportunity for citizens to get involved. If you live near a creek that you could go down to, especially like I've mentioned, kind of a warm day after there's been snow, and then we've got some salty snowmelt likely headed to that stream, and you can test the chloride concentration, again, chloride, as our marker of salt in those streams. So the Isaac Walton League will actually send free test strips out to anybody all over the country. So you could be doing this in Wisconsin. Maybe you have relatives in Minnesota or Iowa. Tell them about this. They can be doing this as well. And then all this data gets shared back to the Isaac Walton League and goes into their database as they try to be advocates nationally for the health of our fresh water. So we've got a couple volunteers here that have been participating in this through the Fox Wolf Watershed Alliance. So in addition to doing this as an individual, you can connect with different watershed groups like Fox Wolf Watershed Alliance, Superior Rivers, the Milwaukee River Keeper, Milwaukee area. So there are a number of watershed groups across the state that are supporting their members to do monitoring like this. The Milwaukee River Keeper program has actually been around for a number of years, and they work, my understanding is, with some other tools to go out there and do monitoring. In the Madison area, the Starkweather Creek is an impaired water body that the Capitol Area Regional Planning Commission is working on getting volunteers to get out and do monitoring at, to again increase our understanding of what's really happening in those streams. How bad is the situation, and just getting more data and increasing our understanding there. So free test kits, even if you are not a part or not working with anybody, any sort of organization, you can get out there. So in addition to seeing those salt concentrations go up in our surface water, we're also seeing it in our groundwaters we've talked about over the last few days. If you are in Wisconsin, you can go to the UW Stevens Point well water viewer, and you can actually zoom in to what's going on in your area. This is data from private wells. So not, big municipalities with lots of parking lots and sidewalks. And we are seeing chloride concentrations go up again, naturally, 0 to 10 maybe. And they're largely not there throughout the state anymore. Again, road salt, sidewalk salt, also sometimes fertilizers, potassium chloride fertilizers have that chloride ion in them, cheese brine, pickle juice, other sources of chlorides. So I did want to draw this back to sodium, because sodium is the bigger concern for human health in our drinking water. So Shannon focused yesterday on chloride. Allison Couture on Wednesday talked about sodium in our drinking water. This is data that was mapped out for me by Kevin Masaryk and staff from UW Stevens Point. So now we are talking about municipal water systems here and seeing sodium concentrations that are elevated in large portions of our state. I would say most of our state. I'll kind of draw around here. Maybe not Racine and Kenosha, not around Green Bay, not around Superior, but most of Wisconsin. Naturally, our sodium concentrations would be in that 0 to 10, same as the chloride. If you are someone who is really trying to watch your sodium intake, it wouldn't be a bad idea to look at and try to understand how much sodium is in your drinking water. One thing that we didn't have this year was a biologist talking about impacts of salt on organisms. So I really would encourage people, if you didn't join us a couple years ago for Salt Awareness Week, to check out the presentation by Bill Hintz for Salt Awareness Week 2021. One of his students, Bailey, gave a presentation last year, but they are one of the primary labs looking at what organisms are impacted at what levels. And what they've showed clearly is that it's zooplankton in the food chain are the most sensitive to increases in salt. And so, as zooplankton populations go down, means not as many predators to eat the algae, right? So water is getting greener and murkier. This is actually a photo of a bucket in one of their experiments with different concentrations of salt, showing that as salt concentrations went up, the water got greener and murkier there with more algae. Also, less zooplankton means there's less food, right? Going up the food chain. So kind of indirect negative consequences throughout the food chain. Bill Hintz, again, this is his picture there on the bottom left, also looks at direct impacts to different organisms that many of us care about, like fish. We have little fingerling trout here, and the young of the species are impacted first because they don't have that great ability to osmoregulate and pull salts and kind of out of their body, do like that salt water balance. So we see reduced rates of growth, reduced rates of reproduction, higher susceptibility to parasites, to stressor on their system. So again, I would direct you to Bill Hintz, his lab, some of the webinars they've given us, or just if you really want to dive into the science, kind of taking a look at their lab and the papers they put out. So again, there are a number of numbers that we talk about when we're talking about sodium and chloride. So these are all chloride numbers. We talk about that 20 milligrams per liter of sodium for people who should be on low sodium diets. But I want to acknowledge that when we're talking about, 1 teaspoon of salt pollutes 5 gallons of water, that is the Wisconsin DNR's chronic exposure limit. But I do not believe, based on the science, that is a biologically protective limit for our organisms. Michigan, a couple years ago, set their chronic value at 150. Again, this is based similar to Wisconsin's on lab tests. So toxicological tests, salt concentrations go up for looking at a few different species and how they are impacted by that. The EPA nationally has set the limit at 230, but more recent data, especially data when we actually are looking out in streams at what chloride concentrations are and where we see or don't see different organisms. The work of Bob Miltner in Ohio is suggesting that if we want to be biologically protective of organisms, we really need to be 230 is not doing it. It is underprotective. And we need to have chloride at about 52 milligrams per liter or less. So again, this is where we need more, we need to increase our understanding, right, of the impact salt is really having. So a lot of bad news, and I realize I've already gone to my half an hour. I'm going to talk about what we can do. If you have to leave us, I'm sorry. Hopefully you can pop back on later. So what we can do, I'll try to pick up the pace here. Education, making sure you're educated, supporting the education of any winter maintenance staff that you have connections to. So in your municipality, whether that be, a city, a town, a village, have your staff gone through training? Do they understand kind of what's available right now? And do they have the ability to use the right materials in the right amount at the right time? We least know what they should be doing. And then it's supporting them to make sure they have the resources to do that, right? So we have in-person and virtual trainings through Saltwise. The American Public Works Association has in-person trainings for municipal and county staff. SIMA, the Snow and Ice Management Association, I'll mention them later, has a training program. We have free webinars. So all the Saltwise trainings are free. Our webinars that we put out every month are free. There are additional resources on our website for winter maintenance staff. So again, we're gearing this both towards people who are maintaining roads as well as people looking at parking lots and sidewalks. So contractors, school districts, custodial staff, maintenance staff at hospitals, apartment buildings, everybody who is putting down salt, especially in those larger quantities, needs to know right material, right amount, right time. How do you figure that out? In addition to just kind of providing that more kind of book learning or presentations, Saltwise really works to engage the winter maintenance professionals and in conversation with one another about what's working, what's not, sharing their stories. So we have equipment open house events across the state, generally in the fall when people are switching from, summer, gearing up for winter activities. And people get to learn and see, brine makers, just like general practices. This is Corey Teets from the city of Eau Claire, talking about his trucks. And you can see how passionate, right? Like engaged people are, especially if they've been able to achieve really significant salt reductions. And it's just, they don't always have those great opportunities to share what's working for them. So we try to make that happen. Whenever we have these events, really try to get out in front of the public as much as possible and promote the great work that's being done, and just use that as another way to raise awareness. So this is an equipment open house in De Pere in the Green Bay area. So best practices, I'm going to briefly go through a few of these. We dive into them with the winter maintenance professionals, but calibration is huge. You need to know what's coming out of your truck or whatever equipment you have. There's huge dollar savings to be had there. This is a photo, just kind of jaw dropping, right? This was a truck that should have been putting down 300 pounds per lane mile, and it was actually putting down 850. But how is someone going to know if you don't take the time to calibrate? So a lot of calibration resources available. We plan on hosting more calibration workshops this coming year. That can happen, like I said, any type of equipment. Calibrate the trucks, smaller scale, calibrating drop spreaders. If you are at a smaller building where there might be, scoops and just a salt bucket out there, making sure people understand, even with those scoops of salt, kind of how much needs to go down. So marking lines, giving some instructions to people. If possible, I'd say just pull the salt bucket. If the salt is the only tool you give people, that's the tool they're going to use, and it might not be the best tool. So, or at least have, can you also have a shovel or a broom out there? If we can shovel and then sometimes sweep up the remainder of snow, we might not need salt. When we're applying, like I said, the right material, right amount, right time, a lot of that has to deal with pavement temperature. So we talk about measuring pavement temperature and then making those decisions about rates and materials. I love sharing this photo from inside the cab of a City of Stevens Point truck, where they've got different temperature zones. Drivers can look at pavement temperature, that's the key temperature here, and then make those decisions about rates based off of this guidance, instead of just, well, should I crank her up to 5? I don't know. How's it looking today? So just more guidance and support. We can also see this salt as being pre-wet, which is awesome, because by wetting that salt, when it hits the ground, it's going to stick and it's going to start that melting process immediately, and it stays where we want it to be. So all the salt is on the road. Both of those things help us drive down the total amount of salt that's needed. This is a photo that I took from staff at UW Eau Claire that had taken the smart salting class. You can see they're showing off their notes here, and then work to make their own brine maker. So the system on the right here, just reusing some old totes, is the brine maker that the University of Eau Claire staff used to make brine that they use now on parking lots and sidewalks. On the left, I've got the brine maker part of it from UW Whitewater. They, again, made their own brine maker and kind of fashioned their own sidewalk sprayers too. So sometimes the cost of this equipment can be prohibitive. If you've got very smart, talented staff in-house, sometimes they can figure this stuff out. Supporting those winter maintenance staff folks that are out in sometimes nasty conditions, let's be honest, right? Winter in Wisconsin, a number of your states, I'm sure, can be pretty tough. It's cold, people working long hours. Sometimes, they're out there crazy hours in the dark, trying to get parking lots, sidewalks, roads into a condition where they're safe for people, right? So looking at, can we close down unneeded stairwells and not try to maintain something that's going to be kind of higher risk throughout the winter. Different signage to put up to encourage people to walk carefully. And maybe there's some areas near creeks or wetlands where we decide we're not going to salt, and we're just going to use mechanical removal, and then noting that for people. So again, kind of looking at all those best management practices. In terms of those expectations, I love the City of Eau Claire Streets Department has their own Twitter and works to share messages with residents. We're here so you can get there. We're doing our part, but you can do your part too. Leave early, leave space. So getting those messages out to the general public. Simple things like parking, following parking rules really help encourage or help support mechanical removal of that snow faster and can enable less salt to go down. A couple success stories here I wanted to share. UW Green Bay, the town of Lynn, have both experienced, incredible leadership. People that have been super passionate about right-sizing salt use, and that has saved these community, campus dollars, reduced damage to their infrastructure. But I have to give a special shout out today to Matt Whittam from the town of Lynn. He is Mr. Saltwise. Matt writes articles, constantly researching kind of best practices, shares that knowledge with us and the Saltwise community through webinars. He has spearheaded training events in Walworth County and just continues to come up with new ideas and ways to support winter maintenance professionals. So Matt, you're awesome. So just love to share those stories of people that are doing such incredible stuff. So these are a couple of photos Matt just shared with me this morning, I think, of one of their town vehicles going out and putting those lines of brine down on the road. So I just wanted to share some of these stories because I feel like sometimes it feels hard. What am I going to do as an individual? Like, what impact does that have? But like wherever we're at, if we can support even small reductions in salt, that's protecting our local waters, right? Salt is not something that goes up into the air, into our global atmosphere. The salt problem is a local problem. It's watershed specific. So knowing that you're not alone, finding ways to connect with others that also care about our local waterways and making a difference is 100% possible. So I mentioned, the webinars. I mentioned Matt does a lot of them. He's lined up here for May 10th, Smart Salting, Reviewing the Basics. We've got other partners presenting February, different types of de-icers and products. What do you know, what's in the bag? How do you figure that out? How do you use these materials, choose the right one and use it appropriately? A great presentation coming up in March on calibration with Brian Pickworth from Farmington Hills, Michigan. Brian's taught calibration all across the country, super passionate about this. And then in April, we've got folks talking about the limited liability protection in New Hampshire. My other success story was UW Green Bay. So this is Randy from UW Green Bay. He actually works for SSC. It's a contractor that UW Green Bay hires to do winter maintenance work. And Randy's holding up here his certificate of completion. He went through SIMA's snow management online training and has really taken a look with some of the former staff, Brad, who used to be at UW Green Bay, kind of sat down and really thought about what tools do we have. Some of these tools don't make sense. Let's get rid of them and let's move towards things that work for us on our campus and help us really move snow so we don't have as much salt going down. So part of that is looking at brush tools to really sweep and just get down to bare pavement. And in other cases, it's bigger plows, sectional plows with sectional or blades, plows with sectional blades to get a better scrape. So they then took it to the next level and wrote out their policy for these different pieces of equipment and different operators and made different zones and made plans for, winter kind of evening events and what's going to be the plan, diagrammed out where the snow piles go to make sure that that's all set and we're not going to end up with debris ending up in our wetlands at the end of the winter. More amazing stories, innovation like that in the city of Glendale. where the city didn't have the resources to buy a brine truck. These can be, 250 grand plus. So what about repurposing an old fire truck that the fire department isn't using anymore? They have huge liquid capacity. And so this vehicle is just out on the road for the first time this winter. But their mechanic, bought the controls and then was able to rig it up. And they've got a brine truck for like a 10th of the cost. Other incredible ideas to think about would be ways to reuse some of the waste salts that we have from the food industry, from water softeners. So this is a photo I took at the USDA Forest Products Lab as they were setting up a waste brine reclamation system to capture the waste salts from their water softeners. And then instead of sending them down the pipe, the wastewater treatment plant that can't pull those out, they were now using those for their winter maintenance activities. I had a question that came in this morning about environmentally friendly de-icers. The idea here is that they're not permanent pollutants. Again, environmentally friendly, though, you have to be careful because there's no truth in labeling for de-icers. So something can say it's environmentally friendly and still be chock full of chlorides, either sodium chloride, mag chloride, calcium chloride. But environmentally friendly de-icers, things like CMA, calcium magnesium acetate, potassium formate, potassium acetate. The idea here is that these acetate ions, you're seeing that instead of the chloride, it's kind of taking the place of the chloride, and the acetate can be broken down. But basic idea here is that if something can be broken down, it means it's being eaten by something else, right? So microbes are eating those acetate ions. And anytime that we have microbial kind of decomposition going on, we're questioning, well, is that happening in our water? Because then it can reduce the total amount of oxygen that's available. And I've got a diagram to show that in just a second. But I want to note that we see things like calcium, magnesium, potassium are also part of those products. What's happening to those ions? So there is research going on last year. One of our presenters during Salt Awareness Week, the student finishing up her master's at the University of Minnesota Duluth and trying to research the impacts of, I believe it was potassium formate, but now it might have been potassium acetate. You can go back and watch that, trying to understand what impacts that's going to have on our waters. But the basic idea of acetates is that they're organic, made of carbon, they can be broken down. And if things that can be broken down end up in our water in higher quantities, then we've got little microbes in the water that can eat those, right? Our little Pac-Man. As that's happening, they might be drawing oxygen out of the water. And so we can see the total amount of oxygen available for fish and other critters go down. So that's where we have to be concerned about anything that has like that sugar, that organic kind of piece to it. Is that going right into our water? If it's going to end up in the soil, can be broken down in the soil. That feels pretty good. But if it's going to be headed straight towards our water, then we have to ask some questions. So more other alternatives to looking at this issue involve legislation. So I mentioned New Hampshire has that limited liability protection in place. Shannon mentioned that yesterday. In Wisconsin, we just had a bill introduced on Monday by State Senator Andre Jacques to create a similar program in Wisconsin. I think this would be a game changer, just like it was in New Hampshire. We need to have something like this at some point and cross our fingers. Maybe this could be the year. So if you do live in Wisconsin and you can contact your local legislators and tell them this issue is important to you and you would like to see them sign on to State Senator Andre Jacques' bill that would create a smart salting kind of certification program, happy to give you more information on that. In the city of Madison, I mentioned there's also an ordinance, local ordinance right now to say you have to sweep up that extra salt. So we can try to tackle this at the state level, also at the municipal level. In Minnesota, they've created model ordinance language for municipalities and given them, if you want to Google this, I just got the info, easy way to bring it up. I'll try to put it on the Saltwise website too, if I can get permission for that. They say there are different ways that our municipalities could support smart salting. That sweeping requirement, like we see in Madison, also requiring that maintenance staff get certified in best practices, like we're talking about doing, statewide. Different requirements for salt storage or appropriate storage, that would be required. And then anytime there's land disturbance, like a new building or new construction happening, that the people that are getting that building permit would also need to show that they've got a plan for how chlorides or salts are going to be managed on their property. So making it as easy as possible. The idea here is to make it as easy as possible for municipalities to kind of do the right thing. Other ways that we can get the word out. So different municipalities like Oshkosh here on the left, Sustainable Neenah. I think this is from McFarland, getting the word out to residents and different mailers. On the far right, we've got an e-newsletter that an alder put together. I shared some information with her and she shared it out with all of her constituents. And then also different events. So these are some photos from an event I ran with volunteers at UW-Madison, printing t-shirts and teaching folks about salt and salt pollution and what's being done. So there's just some of the wood block prints made by a local artist. So trying to look at, fun, creative ways to get the message out. Doing some work with the Foxwolf Watershed Alliance and UW Oshkosh, a paddle event where people could measure chloride concentrations and learn about the issue again, do some of that monitoring, maybe sign on to be monitors year round. This is an event at River Falls. The city gets out and every single second grader in River Falls gets to see all of the city's trucks, sweepers, snow equipment, mowers. And one of the stations is to learn about smart salting and why the city cares about that, what they're doing. They've got the little 5-gallon bucket in the background here you can see, and they talk about how 1 teaspoon of salt pollutes 5 gallons of water. So events like this, I think, are really going to help change norms around salting. Other resources for teachers, even if your municipality isn't doing something, throughout the whole municipality, we've got different resources on our website for teachers. So Take Action Teacher Resources will bring you to this page for different lesson plans. There are little videos that go along with this data nugget with Lexi. And then getting the word out about water softeners as well. So here I am going on almost an hour about road salt. Water softeners, I will tie this up soon, can also do contribute to this problem as well. So all the salt we put into water softener, wastewater treatment plants can't pull that out. So across Wisconsin, in areas where we see hard groundwater, we have these orange dots, meaning that the wastewater treatment plants are receiving all that salt that people put in water softeners to deal with the hardness, and the wastewater treatment plants cannot pull that salt out, so it's all going downstream. I'm going to skip over, because of time, kind of the connections about kind of what drives water hardness and how water softeners work. I can take that if that's a question, but I want to get to the end here. So best practices, making sure you're only softening water that you need to. You're not wasting softened water. You're not sending soft water out to your plants. That would make zero sense. You want to ditch those old clunkers that are super inefficient, and make sure even if you have a newer softener, it's running efficiently for your needs. There are salt-free options. More information I can share on our website. We've got stuff. Also, if there are questions, this is a water conditioner. It's not a softener. It's not adding salt in the city of Madison. Someone's had for about a dozen years. So educating yourself, educating those professionals, collaborate with us, get creative about ways to get that message out there. Always happy to take volunteers. Advocate for legislation at the state level or municipal level. Those are some of the things that I have to share. And thank you for your time. I'm going to switch over here to any questions that people might have, and hopefully they're still on. Okay. let me go here. All right. So are there salt brine applicators for home use? David asks. I've heard the city of Superior has put together recommendations for people if you want to make your own salt brine. And yeah, so I would encourage you to check out their site. If you can't find anything, email me back and I can get some information to you. I would say again, at that, if possible, at the residential level, if we're able to get out there early with the shovel, and then that broom and sweep up any remaining snow, that we can generally avoid salt, because salt brine is still salt. But if you're interested in making salt brine, a good applicator tool for that would be just like an herbicide sprayer, like a pesticide sprayer. I think folks from Myrick Park have been using that. So maybe you want to put into the chat Myrick Park and La Crosse, if you're still on, how that's been working for you. So Aaron asked, would sweeping and landfilling excess salt be a good disposal method? No. And he answered that question himself. The chlorides will eventually leave the landfill and the leachate. So that water, right? Landfill leachate is going to love the chloride. It's going to move through the landfill and end up being collected in leachate, which does in our landfills today get processed at wastewater treatment plants. But again, the wastewater treatment plant cannot pull that chloride out. So it's going downstream. So if we do have extra salt, don't throw it in the landfill. Township road plowers are all saltwise trained, still apply solid salt to roads. Can their trucks be retrofitted for brine spraying? How expensive is it? So yeah, there are, like we said, sometimes resource limitations, especially in towns, to kind of retrofit or upgrade trucks. There are some options to retrofit depending on kind of what truck you have out there. I would say that's probably something, if you can have either reach out to me and I can have a more in-depth conversation with your community, and we could see, what might be possible with the trucks that you have. Are Wednesday webinars recorded to view at later times? Yes, all of our Wednesday webinars are available on the YouTube channel in perpetuity. You can access them from the Wednesday webinars on the page. We've got them all listed with descriptions, or you can just go to the YouTube channel and scroll around. Should we ban hardware stores from selling large bags of salt for homeowner use, or limit supply, or only allow purchase if you show a certificate from Saltwise that you've been trained? I don't know that any of those things are going to be practical in the short term. I have worked with different hardware stores. Ace Hardware has been super supportive of putting some Saltwise signs up. Had a harder time at bigger box stores. But I do think that trying to get people at that point of sale is a good plan. Maybe depending on your community, you'd be able to, pass an ordinance that would, say that signs have to go up, or kind of limit or restrict kind of who can buy salt, how much salt they can purchase. But I would say, all of this work, it's increasing that general awareness so that people have more of an appetite for restricting salt use. But, we are not saying don't salt at all. We do see that salt helps keep people safe. And so I think we're not trying right now to kind of ban the use of salt. It's just encourage better use of it. What about brine over spray? Since it's sticky, does it harm vegetation and infrastructure more? So, if we overuse brine, yeah, not beneficial, but in general, when we're using brine, it's enabling us to use less total salt. So that means less total damage to infrastructure, vegetation, etc. We do talk about it being sticky or helping the rock salt stick and not bounce, out of the lane. You can have additives in it, different sugars that may increase its stickiness. But the idea is it's that way the spray is staying on the pavement where we want it to be. It's not spraying out of the road and onto vegetation. When those sugars are added, they can actually reduce the corrosivity of the product as well. So in general, I would say brine is enabling us to reduce total salt use. And so that's a good thing. All right, we got some thank yous. Thank you to all of you for sticking on here. I know this has gone pretty long, so we're getting up to that hour mark. If there are other questions, I can definitely stay on. But I do really appreciate all of you for tuning in today, this week. All of our webinars, all the Wednesday webinars are available. So check those out, continue to use the web resources. If there are things that you are looking for that you can't find, you can always reach out to me. I'll put my email in there, wisaltwise@gmail.com. And I'm happy to, make resources for your community. If, the Common Council is open to a presentation, I've presented to sustainability boards, done trainings for local landscaping companies, worked with school districts to host events. So there's a lot to be had. And if you and your community have some connections and can help, facilitate more events and trainings, that would be wonderful. So I don't see any questions coming in right now. I'll wait a second more and I will check my email here. But I don't see any coming in on Gmail either. We'll check that. Okay. All right. Well, in that case, I think we're good. We're going to call it a week. It's been a week, everybody. I hope you had a lovely Wisconsin Salt Awareness Week. And be well, take care, and keep sharing your